John Jones was your average 26-year-old college student. He was a husband, father, brother, and son. But in 2009, Thanksgiving Day, his life will be lost in quite possibly one of the most tragic accidents I've possibly ever heard of. So let's get started. November 2009, John Jones was back home in Utah visiting his family on holiday break. As John was a college student in Virginia, he missed his family in Utah, so he decided to visit along with his wife and young child. A couple days before Thanksgiving, his family and some friends thought it'd be a good idea to do spelunking. Now, John Jones was an avid spelunker when he was younger, but he hadn't been in a cave in X amount of years. He said it had been about 7 or 8 years since he had actually been spelunking, and he, of course, was older, about 6 feet and 200 pounds. And again, he was about 26 years old at the time. They went to the cave around 8 p.m. known as Nutty Putty Cave. And Nutty Putty Cave got its name because of its the rocks inside the cave. Some of them were hard, of course, and other ones were soft, kind of like clay. And Nutty Putty Cave had actually just reopened earlier that year in 2009 due to being closed for about a couple of years due to some people being stuck in a cave and having to be rescued, unfortunately, by rescue crew. That didn't really scare John Jones or his friends or family. They were actually really excited to go. Again, around 8 p.m., a couple days before Thanksgiving, they headed to the cave. Everything seemed fine. Although the cave had a very narrow entrance, they seemed up for the challenge. Sometime around 8:30 or so, John Jones was supposedly searching the cave with his friends and family and decided to look for something called the birth canal, which was a very narrow passageway in the cave. Now, the birth canal, of course, got its name because it was very, very narrow, but it also led to a wider opening. When John Jones finds what he thinks is a birth canal passage, he's on his stomach, and he inches himself using his shoulders and hips in a very dangerous narrow passageway. In fact, in 2006, 2 Boy Scouts found themselves stuck about a week apart in that same area that John was crawling through. The area actually was not the birth canal, but a completely separate part of the cave that had been unexplored solely because it was too small. So John is inching using his hips and his shoulders through this passageway, and he finds an even smaller opening that he thinks is leading to a bigger room. Now, this opening there is reported to have been about 18 by 10 inches, which they say is about the opening of a washing machine or a dryer. Mind you, those are actually a lot bigger, but this passageway was very, very small. So as John goes into the passageway, he believes it's going to lead to a wider opening at the end. Unfortunately, as John crawls into that passageway, that's even smaller than the one he's currently in, he finds himself going vertically down into the passage. And they say that John was stuck almost instantly, but he had his entire upper body inside that narrow area. So he thinks again that's going to lead to a bigger opening. He goes to hold in his breath, and he pushes himself a little bit further, only to find himself completely wedged in that area at a 70-degree angle, facing down, completely upside down. He calls for help for his brother, who again was not too far behind him, because he realized he wasn't unable to get out on his own. His brother struggles to get him out. He pulls at his feet, only to have John slip deeper into that narrow passageway. When John's brother realizes that he's absolutely unable to get his brother free, he goes to find help and leaves someone to stay with John. After contacting rescuers, because of the narrow entrance into the cave and how far they were into the cave all around, it takes the rescuers about an hour and a half to reach John. At this point, he's been stuck for almost 2 hours. The first person to get to his side is a rescuer named Sandy. She tells John, "I'm going to get you out of here lickety-split." And the first thing that John reportedly says to her was, "I'm doing really good, but I really, really want to get out of here." Soon after Sandy arrives, multiple other rescuers arrive, and it's reported to have been about over 100 rescuers overall that showed up, went down there and assisted John. Unfortunately, the passageway that led to where he was stuck was so small that only 1 to 2 rescuers can be down there at any given time to help John. So after the basic rescue efforts unfortunately failed, they decided to do what was called a pulley system, where they actually embedded little hooks in the rocks leading to where John was stuck, and they pulled a rope through it that was tied around his feet, hoping to get him out. Now at this point, John's been stuck upside down for hours and hours, and it's reported to have said that people have died being upside down for only a couple of hours, so they knew time was not on their side with the way that John was stuck. These rescuers are attempting everything they know, and they finally get the pulley system in place about 18 hours or so after John has been stuck. Once the pulley system was in place, they start pulling to free John from that narrow crevice he had been in for so long. They pull, and they're actually able to get John a few feet out of the cave. He's still partially stuck, half inside, half out, but at least they're able to get him food and water. And they're even able to bring down a radio so he can talk to his family and his friends and his wife, who have been at the cave site ever since she found out John had been trapped. They take a quick break, but then start again to pull John, believing they were going to be successful in freeing him. As they go to make what they believe was going to be their final pull to free John, the unthinkable happens. One of the clips that was closest to John, that was holding the rope that was tied to his feet, gave way and hit one of the rescuers in the face, knocking him unconscious and actually having him bite his tongue in the process, which led him to bleed out. Unfortunately, when that happened, John went right back into the narrow crevice that he had been in for so long. After tending to the injured rescuer, other people inside began more rescue efforts trying to free John. But unfortunately, after a while, John became unresponsive. And shortly before midnight on Thanksgiving Day 2009, John Jones was pronounced dead. It was unfortunate and heartbreaking, seeing as how so many rescuers had spent about a day and a half genuinely trying to free John. In fact, one of the police officers who was in charge of the entire rescue said that this unfortunate accident in Nutty Putty Cave hit him the hardest out of any other injury or accident that has happened. A, because John was the only person to have died supposedly in Nutty Putty Cave, and also because the rescuers said when they first got to John, he seemed so hopeful and full of life, and in less than a day and a half, he was completely the opposite and unfortunately ended up passing away. After a while, they began rescue efforts trying to think of ways to free his body out of that tomb that it was in. But after about a day or so, the officer who was in charge of the rescue decided it would be too dangerous to try and attempt to get John's body out of that crevice. So, with that being said, they decided to leave his body, along with his family's decisions and permission, in the cave. He would not come out. They would not go down there due to it being too dangerous for the rescuers. They didn't want anyone else to perish in the cave. So at that point, the cave was sealed off, and there were officers guarding it 24 hours a day for the next few days. Finally, less than a week later, they poured cement into the tight, small opening, which is reported to have been the only opening to Nutty Putty Cave, and they also placed a plaque on what is now John Jones' tomb and final resting place. R.I.P. John Jones.